Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. I've been working at this mid-sized tech company for about 4 years now. When I first started, it was actually a pretty decent place to work. The pay was okay, the benefits were good, and most importantly, the work-life balance was respected. My position involved managing our client database, handling some customer service issues, and doing a bit of everything on the technical side. I wasn't exactly swimming in extra cash, but I was comfortable enough to pay my bills and occasionally treat myself. All of that changed when our original manager left about a year and a half ago. The company hired this new guy, I'll just call him the boss, who was supposedly brought in to optimize operations and streamline our workflow. You know, all those corporate buzzwords that really just mean make people work harder for the same pay. From day one, the boss made it clear he was all about hustle culture. He'd constantly talk about how he worked 80-hour weeks when he was coming up in the industry, and how that's what it took to really succeed. He'd make these little comments whenever anyone left at 5 p.m. on the dot, like, half day today, huh? Or, must be nice to have such an easy workload, just little digs to make you feel guilty for not staying late. At first, I tried to just ignore it. I'd smile politely, grab my stuff, and head out at my scheduled time. I have a life outside of work, after all. I've got a wife who appreciates seeing me before bedtime, friends I like to hang out with, and hobbies that keep me sane. But the boss clearly took my adherence to my actual work schedule as some kind of personal insult. About 6 months into his tenure, he started assigning me tasks late in the day, usually around 4 p.m., that he knew would take several hours to complete. "Hey, I need this report compiled and on my desk by morning," he'd say casually, dropping a stack of data on my desk as I was preparing to leave. The first few times I stayed late to get it done. I figured everyone has to put in extra hours occasionally, and I wanted to be a team player. But these occasional tasks quickly became a daily occurrence. And here's the kicker. We don't get paid overtime. We're all salaried employees, and the boss was taking full advantage of that fact. After about a month of this, I decided to have a conversation with him. I scheduled a meeting and professionally explained that I had personal commitments in the evenings and couldn't regularly stay hours past my scheduled time. "Look," I said, trying to be reasonable, "I understand that sometimes there are urgent tasks that need to be handled, but if these late assignments are going to be a regular thing, we might need to adjust my work hours or redistribute some of my tasks." The boss leaned back in his chair, giving me this look like I'd just suggested we should all start working in our pajamas. "I don't think you understand how things work in the real world," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Everyone here is expected to be flexible. If you need to stay late to get your work done, that's just part of being a professional. Maybe you're not managing your time effectively." "I manage my time just fine," I replied, feeling my frustration rise. "The issue is getting assigned new, time-consuming tasks right before I'm scheduled to leave." He shrugged. "That's just how business works sometimes. If you can't handle that, maybe this isn't the right environment for you." That was his go-to move, implying that I wasn't cut out for the job if I wasn't willing to sacrifice my personal life for the company. Classic manipulation tactic. And to make matters worse, he started CCing his boss, the company's VP, on emails assigning me these end-of-day tasks, making it look like I was the one causing delays if I didn't stay late to complete them. One particularly frustrating Friday, the boss waited until 4:45 p.m. to come to my desk. We close at 5 p.m. on Fridays, and my wife and I had dinner reservations at 6:30 p.m. for our anniversary. "I need you to rebuild these customer reports," he said, dropping a USB drive on my desk. "The format we've been using isn't working for the executive team. I need it done for a meeting Monday morning." I looked at the USB, then at my watch. "I can't stay late today. My wife and I have plans. It's our anniversary." "This is urgent," he insisted. "The VP specifically asked for this to be ready by Monday." "Then why are you only telling me about it now, at 4:45 on Friday?" I asked. "I just got the request," he said, though his shifty eye contact told me that was a lie. "Look, this is part of your job. Sometimes we have to make sacrifices." "I've made plenty of sacrifices over the past few months," I replied. "I'll come in early on Monday to get it done." The boss's face darkened. "That's not acceptable. This needs to be ready first thing Monday, which means it needs to be done before then. If you're not willing to put in the time, maybe we need to reconsider your position here." That was the first time he'd directly threatened my job, and it made my blood boil, but I kept my cool, at least outwardly. "Fine," I said. "I'll see what I can do." He nodded smugly and walked away. I called my wife right after, explaining the situation and apologizing profusely. She was understanding, but clearly disappointed. We'd had these reservations for weeks. That weekend, as I worked on rebuilding those reports, which took almost all of Saturday, I started paying closer attention to the email chains the boss was including me on. I noticed that in his communications with the VP and other higher-ups, he was taking credit for a lot of my work and the extra hours I was putting in. He was painting himself as this dedicated manager who was mentoring me and helping me rise to the challenges of my role. What really got me, though, was an email chain I wasn't supposed to see. The boss had forwarded some correspondence between us to the VP, but hadn't removed the previous messages. In one of them, he explicitly told the VP that he was testing the boundaries of the team to see how much they could handle without additional compensation. He specifically mentioned me as someone he was applying pressure to because I seemed too comfortable with my work-life balance. I was furious. This wasn't about urgent business needs or my job performance. It was a calculated effort to squeeze free labor out of employees, and I was his main target. The next week, things came to a head. The boss called me into his office late Thursday afternoon. "I've been reviewing your performance," he said, not bothering to look up from his computer, "and I'm concerned about your commitment level. Several tasks have been completed late or right at the deadline." "That's because they're being assigned to me at the end of my workday," I pointed out. "As I've said before, we need flexibility here. Everyone else seems to understand that." This was a lie. My coworkers were all suffering under similar conditions, but many were too afraid to speak up. "I've been staying late almost every day," I countered. "Not late enough, apparently." He finally looked at me. "I'm putting you on a performance improvement plan. For the next month, I expect you to demonstrate more dedication. That means staying until tasks are completed regardless of time. A performance improvement plan, or PIP, is often the first step toward firing someone." He was essentially giving me an ultimatum: work unpaid overtime regularly or lose my job. "Is this really about my performance?" I asked carefully. "Or is it about seeing how much free labor you can get out of employees before they break?" His eyes narrowed. "Excuse me?" "I saw the email," I said. "The one where you told the VP you were testing boundaries and applying pressure to see how much work you could get without additional compensation." The boss's face went from confused to alarmed to angry in the span of seconds. "You had no right to read that email." "You sent it to me," I replied. "Maybe you should be more careful about what you forward." He was fuming now. "This is a serious breach of confidentiality. You could be terminated for this." I stood up. "For reading an email that was sent to me? I don't think so, but I'd be happy to discuss this situation with HR, including all the unpaid overtime you've been forcing on the team." "Get out of my office," he snapped. I left, heart pounding, and went back to my desk. I knew I'd just made an enemy, but I was too angry to care. The boss clearly thought he could intimidate me into compliance, and I'd just shown him he was wrong. Later that day, I received an email from the boss addressed to the entire team. It outlined new expectations for everyone, including the requirement to stay until all assigned tasks were completed, regardless of scheduled hours. The email specifically mentioned that some team members had expressed resistance to standard industry practices, and that this would no longer be tolerated. It was clearly aimed at me, a warning shot to let me know he wasn't backing down. But at the bottom of the email was something interesting, a long chain of previous messages that he had apparently forgotten to remove. And these weren't just any messages. They were conversations between the boss and upper management discussing ways to maximize productivity without increasing labor costs, and identify replaceable team members who demand too much compensation for their contributions. There were explicit instructions from the boss to target certain employees, including me, with late-day assignments to test our dedication. There was even a spreadsheet tracking how late each employee stayed and calculating the monetary value of that unpaid time. I sat there staring at my screen, barely able to believe what I was seeing. This was the smoking gun, clear evidence of a systematic effort to exploit employees. I had two choices. I could forward this to HR and hope they'd take action against the boss, unlikely, given that the VP was clearly in on it, or I could make sure everyone knew what was happening. I chose the second option. Without overthinking it, I hit reply all. This sent my response not just to the boss, but to every single person on the original email, which was the entire department, about 30 people. In my reply, I simply wrote, "I think everyone should be aware of the full contents of this email chain, particularly the parts discussing how to extract unpaid labor from employees and identifying who is replaceable. Scroll down to see how our extra hours are being tracked and valued, labor that we're providing for free while management takes credit for increased productivity. Is this really the kind of company we want to work for? I hit send before I could second guess myself. Within minutes, my email notifications started going crazy as people replied. Some expressed shock, others outrage. A few thanked me for bringing this to light. The boss tried to do damage control, sending a follow-up claiming that the emails were taken out of context and that my actions were unprofessional and potentially grounds for termination. But it was too late. The truth was out there, and people were angry. By the end of the day, the situation had escalated far beyond the boss's control. Someone, not me, had forwarded the entire exchange to the company's CEO, who was apparently not aware of these tactics. Others had sent it to friends in different departments, and soon the entire company was buzzing about the exploitative practices in our department. The next morning, I came to work expecting to be fired. Instead, I found an email requesting my presence at a meeting with the CEO, the VP, and someone from HR at 10 a.m. When I arrived, the boss was noticeably absent. The CEO opened the meeting with a stern expression. "I want to understand exactly what's been happening in your department," he said, "and I want to hear it from you directly." I took a deep breath and laid it all out. The late-day assignments, the unpaid overtime, the threats to my job, and finally, the emails revealing the deliberate strategy behind it all. I showed them timestamps on task assignments and emails, as well as my timesheets showing how many extra hours I'd been working without compensation. The VP tried to interrupt several times, but the CEO silenced him with a raised hand. "If what you're saying is true," the CEO said when I finished, "this represents a serious ethical breach and potentially legal issues regarding labor practices." "Everything I've said can be verified," I replied calmly. "And I'm not the only one experiencing this. You can ask anyone in the department." The HR representative spoke up. "We've already received similar complaints from 12 other employees since yesterday." The CEO nodded gravely. "We'll need to conduct a full investigation. In the meantime, please continue your work as normal, but strictly within your scheduled hours. If anyone pressures you to stay late without authorization for overtime pay, report it to HR immediately." I left the meeting feeling cautiously optimistic. I wasn't fired, at least not yet, and it seemed like the higher-ups were taking the situation seriously. Over the next week, HR conducted interviews with everyone in our department. The boss was conspicuously working from home during this time. I kept my head down and did my job, leaving precisely at 5 p.m. each day despite the nervous glances from the VP whenever he saw me packing up. 10 days after my reply-all email, we received a company-wide announcement. The boss had decided to pursue other opportunities, corporate speak for being fired or forced to resign. Additionally, the company was implementing a new overtime policy. Any work beyond scheduled hours would require explicit approval and would be compensated accordingly. The VP was still around, but he seemed to have been knocked down a peg or two. He avoided eye contact with me and suddenly became very concerned with team morale and sustainable work practices. It was almost comical watching him try to rebrand himself as a champion of work-life balance. A month later, I was called into another meeting with the CEO. I went in expecting, well, I wasn't sure what to expect. Maybe a delayed firing now that the dust had settled. Instead, the CEO offered me a promotion. "We've been impressed with your integrity and your courage in bringing these issues to light," he said. "We need more managers who understand that exploiting employees is not a sustainable business strategy. Would you be interested in taking over your department?" I was stunned. "Wouldn't that be awkward, given everything that's happened?" The CEO smiled. "From what I've heard, your team would welcome the change. In fact, several of them specifically recommended you for the position." I accepted the offer, which came with a significant salary increase and explicit responsibilities for ensuring fair labor practices within the department. The irony wasn't lost on me. By standing up against exploitation, I'd ended up in a position of authority. My first act as manager was to reorganize our workflow to ensure that last-minute assignments were the exception rather than the rule. I implemented a system where any task expected to take more than 30 minutes couldn't be assigned less than 2 hours before the end of the workday unless it was a genuine emergency. And in those rare emergency cases, employees would be properly compensated for their extra time. The VP, who was technically still my boss, didn't interfere. His own position seemed somewhat tenuous after the investigation, and he was clearly trying to rehabilitate his image within the company. He rubber-stamped all my proposals with a strained smile and lots of comments about excellent initiative. As for the team, morale improved dramatically once people realized they wouldn't be penalized for having lives outside of work. Productivity actually increased. It turns out people work more efficiently when they're not exhausted and resentful. Who knew? Looking back, I'm still amazed at how things turned out. I took a huge risk by hitting that reply all button, and it could have easily gone the other way. I might have been fired and struggled to find another job after being labeled a troublemaker, but sometimes you have to take a stand, even when it's scary. The most satisfying part wasn't getting the promotion or even seeing the boss forced out. It was walking out of the building at 5 p.m. on a Friday, knowing I didn't have to cancel plans or apologize to my wife, and seeing my coworkers doing the same thing, heading home to their lives without guilt or fear. That's worth more than any job title or pay raise. So, if you're in a similar situation with a boss trying to squeeze free labor out of you, know that you don't have to just accept it. Document everything, know your rights, and sometimes an accidental reply. All can change everything. Edit. Wow, this got more attention than I expected. Thanks for all the supportive comments. To answer some common questions, yes, the company did conduct a full audit of overtime practices and ended up paying back wages to several employees who had been working substantial unpaid hours. No, I haven't heard what happened to the boss, but a former coworker spotted him interviewing at a much smaller company, so it seems his career took a hit. And for those asking if there were legal consequences for the company, there weren't any official legal proceedings, but I suspect the quick policy changes and back pay were motivated by fear of potential lawsuits. The CEO mentioned something about getting ahead of liability issues. Update: it's been about 6 months since everything went down, and things have continued to improve. Our department's quarterly results were the best they've been in 2 years, which has definitely helped cement the new policies in place. The VP finally decided to pursue other opportunities last month after it became clear he wasn't going to advance any further in the company. I've hired 2 new team members to better distribute the workload, and we haven't had a single person need to stay late in over 3 months. Sometimes standing up for what's right actually works out. The next one is a malicious compliances story. This happened a few semesters ago where I was taking a course in urban design. Everyone was grouped in 3S, but one of my group members wanted to join another group with their friend, so I ended up with one other person. Not sure why the professor though this was okay, but I wasn't too worried because I was fairly confident in my ability to do the work. The course incorporated previous studio courses to tie together in a massive topic of urban planning, which included architectural design, environmental sustainability, urban infrastructure, and historic preservation. I tried to brainstorm with my partner on which direction we should go. My idea was focused on residentials as housing would address a huge demand here in NYC. However, my partner seemed content on making the project about industrial buildings, so I focused there. We brainstormed on different ideas, but got the impression that he just wanted me to take the lead, as he mostly agreed while not giving much input. Weeks went by, and I constantly updated my partner on my progress via WhatsApp, while rarely getting any update or feedback from him. It annoyed me a bit, but I was still confident in my work, which was enough to get us through the next checkpoint during our next presentation. At some point during the semester, I got a really terrible kidney stone. It wasn't from junk food or a poor diet. In fact, it was from eating too much black beans and chickpeas. A side note, I asked ChatGPT to come up with a healthy dinner plan to give me a list of food, which I used to come up with a meal plan that meets my macro needs. See comment for more. I did feel way better with my new diet, but it eventually led me to having my worst kidney stone of my life that put me in the ER. I was on all kinds of pain meds and had to stay there for several nights, but it didn't end there. The stone was so big that it got stuck. I needed surgery to put in a stent. Don't look up how they put it in. It still gives me nightmares. I had to wait several more weeks and endure pissing deep red blood daily and having yet another surgery to remove the stent. Before finally recovering. Throughout this whole time, I managed to put in some work into my project. I was surprised to learn that my partner did absolutely nothing and waited for me to continue my work. Like, what the actual duck? To make it worse, I learned that he tried to present my work as his own. How can people be like that? I emailed the professor about my situation. I explained how I've did all the work so far and sent him screenshots of the chat as well as my project file, which includes all the history logs. The professor reminded me that during the final submission, everyone had to put their initials on the slides of the work that they worked on. Okay, got it. Luckily, I was recovered and ready to present my work. I left out the initials as it wasn't required for presentation, only for the final submission. I felt the need to see what he'd do. I even tried to cut him some slack and gave him some talking points on the parts I'd allow him to claim as his own, even though it was fully my work. He didn't. He kept cutting me off during presentation to talk about my project as if he had anything to do with it. He mostly repeated the same information that I mentioned while not bringing anything of value to point out. The final presentation had several judges who were comprised of local professional in high-level position within the industry. The conversation was always directed at me, so I had a good feeling that everyone understood that I did most of the work as I knew all of the intimate knowledge of the parts. Then came the last day to submit our work. The final slides included my initials on every single page. Apparently, my partner missed that part about the initials and also submitted an older version of my work. A few weeks go by, and I hit him up asking what he got. I was surprised to learn that actually passed with a C+. He was surprised to hear that I received an A, and promptly said that he'll have a talk with the professor on why he received such a low grade. Honestly, why are there people like this? Anyway, not sure if it's malicious compliance, but I did do everything as instructed and ended up having one hell of a semester. Did I mention that I had morphine for the first time during my ER visit? The next one is an entitled parent's story. Where to start? He's the second child. His older brother is so well behaved and regarded more favorably, so the 14-year-old thinks being a contrarian makes him interesting. Within the last 6 years, he has punched me in the balls 2 times at family events. The first time he didn't get in any trouble, and my sister and her husband were mad at me for calling him a bastard as I was fighting the pain. The second time, which was a couple years later, he was forced to apologize to me, but he refused and ultimately never got in trouble for that either. It's unfortunate because he does have brief moments where he can be cool, but a few minutes later he's shooting his 2,000 Nerf bullets at me when I tell him to stop, while aiming at my face and balls, or trying to throw a kickball at my balls, or he'll just gesture like he's about to punch me in the balls without doing it. So I have that brace for ball punch squat anytime I'm around him, and there's a clear shot and I feel like his bitch for having to do it around him. He has no regard for anything and is especially careless, rubbing up against my mom's beloved Christmas tree ornaments or other decorations. My parents don't really say anything as they try to remain neutral towards all of their kids, and their only 2 grandchildren. I don't know what to do. His brief moments of coolness are completely overshadowed by how annoying he is to be around, and I don't trust him at all. Worst of all, I can't exactly be a dick to him when he's acting normal because then I'm asking for trouble. I try to remove myself from his presence, but our family gatherings are in a really small house, so it's very difficult. I feel like if he does it a 3rd time, I'm going to punch him in the face. He knows he doesn't get in trouble for anything, and any time he's reprimanded, it's basically ignored. I don't know what to do, and I know if I stop going to family things, my parents and siblings will not acknowledge my side of the problem. Talking it out doesn't seem realistic, and he's too young to call the police on him. Yeah, that's how much it's driving me insane. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.